I never thought I'd end up at war with an HOA, especially not in the middle of nowhere. But when Karen, the self-appointed queen of neighborhood rules, came stomping onto my property with a clipboard and a scowl, I knew peace and quiet was nothing more than a distant dream. I moved out to the countryside to get away from all of it. The traffic, the noise, the ridiculous city ordinances telling me how tall my grass could be. I bought land, real land, with space to stretch out and breathe. No one to tell me what color I could paint my house. No busybodies snooping through my trash cans looking for rule violations. It was supposed to be freedom. For the first few weeks, everything was perfect. I'd wake up in the morning to the sound of birds, not honking horns. I could actually see the stars at night, instead of a sky washed out by streetlights. My driveway was long and winding, leading from the main road all the way to my house, surrounded by trees and open land. It was mine. Then came Karen. I had just pulled into my driveway when I saw her. She was standing there, right in the middle of the gravel path, arms crossed, blocking my way like some kind of toll collector. Clipboard clutched in her hands, wearing that signature scowl that looked like it had been permanently etched onto her face. I rolled down my window. Can I help you?" "This road is for residents only," she snapped, eyes flicking to my truck like it was some kind of intruder. I frowned. "I am a resident." She pursed her lips. "This road falls under HOA jurisdiction. You can't just drive on it like it's your personal highway." I let out a short laugh. "This is my driveway, my property, my land." Karen didn't even flinch. "All roads in this community are managed by the HOA. You need to submit a request for access, like everyone else." I stared at her, waiting for some kind of punchline. There was none. She was dead serious. "That's funny," I said, "because the previous owner built this driveway himself. The HOA has nothing to do with it." Her grip on the clipboard tightened. "That's not what the community guidelines state." "Then the community guidelines are wrong," I said, pushing open my truck door, "because legally this land belongs to me." Karen narrowed her eyes. "If you don't comply, we'll have to take further action." I waved her off, slamming the truck door behind me. Good luck with that. I should have known she wasn't bluffing. The next morning, something felt off. I walked outside, coffee in hand, stretching as I took in the peaceful landscape. Then my eyes flicked to the driveway. I froze. A few feet down, right where my truck should have been driving, sharp metal spikes gleamed in the morning sun. I blinked. Maybe I was still half asleep. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. Nope. The closer I got, the clearer it became. Karen had installed spike strips on my driveway. Not just any spike strips. These were professional-grade tire shredders, the kind law enforcement uses in high-speed chases. Bolted, straight into the ground. My hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just some petty HOA fine or a nasty letter in the mailbox. This was sabotage. I crouched down, inspecting the damage. The strips weren't just sitting on the surface. They had been drilled in, deep. Someone had put serious effort into making sure that anything that drove over this stretch of road was left with shredded tires and a destroyed axle. I felt my blood boiling. Karen. She had actually done it. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos. Every angle, every bolt, every twisted metal tooth. I wanted proof. If she thought she could get away with this, she had severely underestimated me. I stormed back up the driveway, shoving my phone in my pocket as I marched straight toward Karen's house. She was going to answer for this. I pounded on her front door so hard, I was half surprised it didn't fly off the hinges. A few seconds later it swung open, and there she stood, smug as ever, coffee mug in hand, looking completely unbothered. "Can I help you?" she asked sweetly. I could feel my jaw clenching. "Are you out of your mind?" I shouted, pointing back at my driveway. "You put spike strips in front of my house." Karen took a slow sip of her coffee, like I had just asked her about the weather. "Well, I did warn you. This is illegal, criminal damage. What if an ambulance needed to get through? What if someone's tires get shredded and they crash?" She shrugged. "Rules are rules. If you have an issue, take it up with the HOA board." I actually laughed, a short, humorless laugh. "Oh, don't worry," I said. "I will." Karen just smirked, taking another sip of coffee, like she had already won. But what she didn't know? I had a lawyer on speed dial, and she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I stormed back to my house, pulled out my phone, and dialed the one person who could put an end to this madness. Matt, my lawyer. The moment he picked up, I didn't even wait for a greeting. "Matt, I need your help. You're not going to believe this." "Try me," he said. I sent him the photos, every single one of them. The spike strips, the bolts, the damage to my driveway. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then a sharp laugh. "You've got to be kidding me." I wish I was. She actually installed spike strips on my property, and she thinks she can get away with it. "Not a chance," Matt said. His tone had switched from amused disbelief to full-on business mode. "This is property damage, reckless endangerment, and illegal road obstruction. She's playing with fire." I leaned against my truck, still fuming. "What do I do? Sue her? Call the cops?" "Oh, we're definitely calling the cops. But before we do, let's make sure she doesn't try to weasel out of this. I'm drafting up a letter now. Legal warning, cease and desist, the works. I want her sweating before law enforcement even shows up." I grinned. Perfect. The next morning, Karen received a very official-looking legal notice. I wasn't there when she got it, but I did see her reaction later. When I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, there she was, sweating, red-faced, furiously ripping the spike strips out of the dirt. She muttered under her breath as she yanked at the bolts, prying up the metal teeth she had so proudly installed just a day before. I leaned against my truck, watching. I could have helped. I could have offered her a crowbar, or even just a kind word. But nah. I just stood there, arms crossed, enjoying the show. I thought that would be the end of it. I should have known better. That night, I was woken up by a loud bang. I sat up instantly, heart pounding. It was coming from outside. I grabbed my flashlight, pulled on my boots, and stepped out onto my porch. The air was still. My truck sat where I had left it. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I turned the beam of my flashlight toward my driveway. My stomach dropped. The spike strips were back. But this time, she had gone even further. She had reinforced them with concrete. I walked closer, disbelief washing over me. The strips were embedded in a layer of fresh cement, still slightly damp. She had actually poured concrete to make sure they stayed in place. I ran a hand through my hair, laughing in sheer frustration. This woman was insane. I took more pictures, every angle, every detail. Then I pulled out my phone and called Matt again. "Matt, we have a problem." A groggy sigh. "What now?" She put them back. There was silence on the other end. Then Matt swore under his breath. "She what?" "And she cemented them in this time." Another long silence. Then, finally, "Okay, that's it. We're taking this to court. Get me every single detail." I grinned, staring down at the concrete-embedded spikes. "Oh, don't worry. She just made this 10 times worse for herself." The next morning I walked outside and there she was, standing at the edge of my property, arms crossed, waiting for me. Her smirk was back. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm as I walked toward her. Karen, I said evenly, I don't know what fantasy world you're living in, but this is private property. You cannot keep sabotaging my driveway. She smirked. I warned you before. Community rules apply to everyone. The board voted on this. We can't have outsiders cutting through our roads without permission. I almost laughed. Outsiders? Karen, I live here. She just shrugged. Then you should have read the HOA guidelines before moving in. I pulled out my phone. I don't need permission. This is my land. You and your little HOA club have no authority over it. And since you refuse to listen, maybe it's time someone bigger than me gets involved. For the first time, Karen's smirk faltered. Oh? And who exactly do you think is going to stop me? I grinned. You're about to find out. I turned on my heel and walked back toward my house. Behind me, I heard her scoff, but I didn't care. She had no idea what was coming. Within the hour, Matt arrived, and this time, he wasn't alone. A sheriff's deputy pulled up right behind him, stepping out of his vehicle with that slow, methodical movement that meant business. Karen, who had still been hovering near my driveway, suddenly looked less sure of herself. The deputy adjusted his belt and nodded toward the spike strips. We received a complaint about illegal road hazards on private property. Care to explain? Karen stiffened. This is a community road. The HOA has every right to… Matt cut her off, holding up a stack of documents. No, they don't. My client owns this land outright. According to county property records, this driveway is not under HOA jurisdiction. Installing spike strips here is illegal. In fact, it's considered reckless endangerment. That's a criminal offense. Karen's face lost all color. You can't be serious. Remove them, the deputy said flatly. Immediately. For the first time since I met her, Karen looked truly panicked. I was just following HOA guidelines, she stammered. This is completely unnecessary. Failure to comply could result in criminal charges, Matt interrupted. You're looking at hefty fines, a lawsuit, and potential arrest. Your call. Karen's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Then, under the watchful eye of the deputy, she had to dig the spike strips out of the concrete with her own hands. I watched as she chipped away at the dried cement, struggling to pry the metal out of the ground. She was red-faced, sweaty, and absolutely humiliated. And the best part? Every single neighbor had come out to watch. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, enjoying every second. But Karen? She wasn't done. By the time Karen had finally pulled the last spike strip out of the ground, she looked like she was about to explode. Sweat dripped down her forehead, her hands were covered in dirt and concrete dust, and her usual smug expression was nowhere to be found. The entire neighborhood had gathered to watch. People whispered amongst themselves, shaking their heads. A few even chuckled under their breath. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was being forced to undo her own mess under the supervision of law enforcement. I stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching her struggle. This isn't over, she muttered, her voice barely audible. I smirked. Oh, I know it's not. She whipped around, glaring at me. You think you can just come into my neighborhood and ignore the rules? This place has standards. You can't just do whatever you want. I let out a laugh. Karen, this isn't your neighborhood. It's mine. I own my property. You don't get to tell me what I can and can't do on my own land. Her jaw clenched. She looked at the deputy for support, but he was already walking back to his car, clearly done with her nonsense. Matt was packing up his legal documents, satisfied that the situation had been handled. For now. Karen didn't have an audience anymore, and she hated that. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed back toward her house, fists clenched at her sides. But I knew that walk. I knew that look. She wasn't done. Not even close. That night, I was sitting on my porch, enjoying a cold beer, finally starting to relax. The spike strips were gone. Law enforcement had made it very clear that Karen had no legal standing. For the first time in weeks, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd finally gotten the message. Then I saw her. Karen was moving from house to house, clipboard in hand, knocking on doors. At first, I thought she was just venting to her fellow HOA loyalists, maybe looking for someone to sympathize with her after her very public humiliation. But the longer I watched, the more I realized this wasn't just some pity party. She was gathering signatures. A few neighbors turned her away, shaking their heads, but others actually signed. I frowned. What the hell was she up to now? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, an emergency HOA meeting was called. I wasn't invited, but that didn't stop me from showing up. The meeting hall was packed, more people than I'd ever seen in one place since I moved here. The tension in the air was thick. People murmured, exchanging glances, waiting for whatever spectacle was about to unfold. And there, standing at the front, was Karen. Her clipboard was stuffed with papers, her face burning with fury, and the moment she opened her mouth, I knew exactly why she had called this meeting. "This man," she began, holding up a stack of signatures like some kind of legal weapon, "is a threat to our community." A few people gasped. Others just crossed their arms, clearly unimpressed. Karen wasn't deterred. "He has no respect for our rules, no respect for the values that keep this neighborhood safe and orderly. He is openly defying the HOA, bringing in lawyers and law enforcement to bully us. If we allow this, what's next?" She dramatically flipped through her papers, eyes scanning the room, waiting for a reaction. Silence. Then someone cleared their throat. It was the HOA president. A man I hadn't interacted with much, but from what I could tell, he wasn't nearly as insane as Karen. "Karen," he said, his voice slow, measured, almost tired. "Are you seriously suggesting that you're the victim here?" Karen's face twitched. "I am simply upholding our community standards." Another voice cut in. "By installing spike strips in someone's driveway." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Karen stiffened. "It was necessary to enforce community guidelines. We cannot allow outsiders." "Outsiders?" someone scoffed. Another resident shook his head. "He lives here, Karen." The HOA president sighed, rubbing his temples. "Karen, this isn't the first time you've pulled something like this, and quite frankly, we're tired of it." Karen looked around, suddenly realizing that she wasn't getting the support she expected. No one was nodding along, no one was clapping, no one was rushing to defend her. For the first time, she had lost. And she knew it. By the end of the meeting, the decision was made. Karen was stripped of her HOA authority. No more clipboard, no more fines, no more community votes. She was done. I thought that was the last I'd hear from her. I should have known better. That night, just as I was about to head inside, I heard yelling. I flicked on my porch light and stepped outside. Karen was in the middle of the street, screaming at my neighbors. "You're all turning against me after everything I've done for this community." She spun in circles, pointing aggressively at random houses. "You think this outsider belongs here. He doesn't follow the rules. He's bringing in lawyers. You think that's how a community should work?" An older neighbor, Frank, a retired veteran who had lived here for years, shook his head. "Karen, you've made this place miserable for years. We're done." Karen's face twisted into something ugly. Then she spotted me. Her rage zeroed in on me like a heat-seeking missile. She stormed toward my property, fists clenched, eyes wild. "This isn't over," she hissed. You think you can come in here and ruin everything? You have no idea who you're messing with. I crossed my arms, unbothered. Karen, you're trespassing. Walk away before you make things worse. She sneered. Oh, you haven't seen worse yet. And with that, she stormed off into the night. But I had a sinking feeling. She wasn't bluffing. The next morning, I stepped outside, ready to finally enjoy a day without HOA nonsense. The sky was clear, the air was crisp, and for the first time in a while, I actually felt relaxed. Then I looked at my driveway, and my truck was gone. For a second, I thought maybe I had parked it somewhere else. Maybe I was just groggy, still waking up. But no, the driveway was empty. The same driveway where I had parked it last night. Panic hit me like a brick. I sprinted inside, grabbed my phone, and pulled up the security footage. And there it was. Karen. In the dead of night, standing beside a tow truck, arms crossed, smirking as my truck was hauled away. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. She had actually done it. She had stolen my truck. I didn't waste a second. I dialed the sheriff's department directly. Yeah, I need to report a stolen vehicle, I said, keeping my voice steady even though my blood was boiling. And I know exactly who took it. The response was immediate. We'll send a unit to your location now. I barely had time to process before a patrol car pulled up to my driveway. And it was the same deputy from before. He stepped out, adjusting his belt, already looking tired. Let me guess, he sighed. Karen? I didn't even need to answer. I just held up my phone and played the footage for him. His eyes narrowed. She hired a tow truck to take your vehicle. Middle of the night. No notice. No warning. Just gone. He let out a low whistle. This is bad. She had no legal right to do this. Where do you think they took it? I already had a suspicion. There's a private impound lot about 5 miles from here, I said. It's not city-run. If she used her HOA connections, that's probably where they put it. The deputy nodded. All right, let's go get your truck back. When we pulled up to the impound lot, I immediately spotted my truck. It was parked behind a locked gate, looking completely out of place next to rows of repossessed junkers. A grizzled old man in greasy coveralls stepped out of a small office, frowning as we approached. Something I can help you with? He grunted. The deputy didn't waste any time. Yeah, this truck was illegally towed from private property. We're here to get it back. The guy scratched his beard. HOA lady said it was an unauthorized vehicle. We just did the job. I stepped forward. Unauthorized according to who? I have legal proof that my driveway is private property and not under the HOA. The guy sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, I don't want any trouble. If you've got proof, I'll release the truck, but you'll have to pay the impound fee. The deputy shook his head. No, he won't. That truck should never have been taken in the first place. If you want to avoid charges for participating in an illegal repossession, I suggest you waive the fee. The guy held up his hands, clearly not looking for a fight. Fine, fine. Take it. Just keep that crazy woman away from me. With my truck back in my possession, there was only one thing left to do. We were going to Karen's house. When we pulled up to her place, she was outside. And the moment she saw us, me, the deputy, and my truck, her face went pale. She tried to play it cool, straightening her shoulders, crossing her arms. But I could see it. The way her jaw clenched, the way her fingers twitched. She knew she was screwed. The deputy stepped forward. Karen, he said flatly, we need to talk. She scoffed, trying to act unfazed. Oh? About what? I held up my phone and played the security footage again. Her standing by the tow truck, watching as my vehicle was taken away. You stole my truck, Karen, I said. That's grand theft auto. Her eyes widened. It wasn't theft. It was a community enforcement action. The HOA rules clearly state. The HOA has no authority over my property, I snapped. You don't get to enforce anything. You committed a felony, and now you're going to pay for it. The deputy didn't give her another chance to argue. Karen, you're under arrest for vehicle theft, he said, stepping forward. Turn around. Her mouth fell open. No, this is ridiculous. You can't do this. The deputy ignored her protests, pulling out his handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Neighbors were already gathering. People were pulling out their phones, recording as Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, was being arrested in front of her own house. I crossed my arms, watching with satisfaction as she thrashed against the deputy's grip. You'll regret this, she shrieked as he guided her toward the police car. I'll get a lawyer. I'll sue. I leaned against my truck, smirking. Good luck with that. I already have a lawyer, and he's a lot better than yours. Karen was taken into custody, and in the days that followed, the HOA scrambled to distance themselves from her. Official statements were made. Letters were sent out. We do not condone the actions of Mrs. Karen. The HOA had no involvement in the illegal towing incident. We are reviewing our policies to ensure something like this never happens again. Blah, blah, blah. Didn't matter. Karen was gone, stripped of her HOA membership, hit with multiple charges, fined thousands in legal fees, and most importantly, no longer a problem in my life. I had won, and my driveway, clear and spike-free forever.